Suddenly, a hand snatched the bottle of alcohol from her grasp. Ji-won had arrived. He told her to stop drinking, saying it was enough. Ji-won was surprised. He really was something. She asked how he had found her. When Ji-won inquired where Park Man-hwan and Sumin were and why she was sitting there alone, she told him they had left and that those two were very close, so he should just pretend he didn't know anything. Ji-won sensed something in her words, as if he had uncovered the relationship between Park Man-hwan and Sumin. He offered to stay with her while she drank and promised to take her home later. Ji-won, exhausted, told him not to worry. She was tired of love and dating. Ignoring her, Ji-won sat down beside her and asked if she wasn't going to date him, how did she plan to take advantage of him? Ji-won didn't understand what Ji-won was talking about. He suggested she should date him if she didn't want to look more haggard. Ji-won panicked, wondering if she really looked that bad. Despite her emotional turmoil, Ji-won's presence had a soothing effect. Ji-won's mood lifted slightly. She didn't hate him at all. Setting her glass down on the table, she asked him to turn to face the door for a moment. Ji-won agreed without hesitation. Ji-won leaned against his back, thinking that just leaning for a moment would be fine. In that moment, his back felt as sturdy as a tree trunk, offering a sense of comfort. They sat there for a long time without speaking, but that was all Ji-won needed right now. Being next to Ji-won made her feel oddly comforted. The next morning, at the Happy Inn, the bright sunlight streamed through the window. Park Man-hwan woke up with a terrible headache. He opened his eyes, trying to remember what had happened as he sat up, feeling a sense of unease. Suddenly, Park Man-hwan realized he had completely lost his mind. He glanced over at Sumin, still asleep, then looked around the messy room. Panic set in. If this got out, the employees at the company and Ji-won would cut ties with him for good. Just then, Sumin woke up, still acting cute as if nothing was wrong. Park Man-hwan, feeling awkward, told her they had both gotten drunk the night before, so it would be best to pretend nothing happened. Sumin, confused, asked how they could just ignore the fact that they had slept together. She pouted, clearly aware that he knew about her feelings for him. Did he really not have any feelings for her at all? Park Man-hwan was flustered. He tried to explain that it wasn't like that, but he had to meet his future in-laws today. Tears welled up in Sumin's eyes as she promised not to interfere in his relationship with Ji-won or tell anyone about what had happened. However, she added that he would still have to continue seeing her in secret. Park Man-hwan felt cornered. He knew he couldn't accept her offer, but the damage had already been done. Feeling guilty, he embraced Sumin tightly, thinking to himself that his romantic entanglements were spiraling out of control. Suddenly, the phone on the wall rang. It was Ji-won calling Park Man-hwan. She asked if he had woken up yet and why he had returned before her the night before. Park Man-hwan explained that Sumin hadn't been feeling well, and since the hired driver had arrived right on time, he couldn't wait for Ji-won to go back together. As Ji-won applied her makeup, she casually asked if he had booked a restaurant for the two families to meet. Park Man-hwan told her he had reserved a spot at the traditional Luhung restaurant at 5 p.m. on the first floor. Ji-won said she would meet him after finishing her makeup. Hearing the conversation with her boyfriend, the makeup artist complimented Ji-won and promised to make her look stunning for the occasion. Ji-won insisted on a bold, unforgettable look that would leave a lasting impression. Surprised, the artist asked if she wasn't meeting her boyfriend today and why she wanted such a dramatic style. Ji-won recalled her life with her late mother-in-law before she passed away. She remembered the harsh words. How her mother-in-law once said she didn't accept Ji-won for her beauty, but because she took good care of her son. One morning, she had even yelled at Ji-won for serving leftovers for breakfast, saying that on weekends a wife should wake up early and prepare nourishing meals for her husband. On top of that, she belittled Ji-won, cruelly commenting that those without parents were worthless, and suggesting that Ji-won's parents had died young because of this. This time, Ji-won was determined to approach the situation differently. She would meet Park In-won's family with a new mindset, prepared to challenge their expectations and change their view of her. Meanwhile, after Park Man-hwan had left, Sumin paced angrily in her room. Why had he left her there to meet Ji-won? To Sumin, Ji-won could never compare to her, so why was Park Man-hwan abandoning her to marry Ji-won? Fueled by jealousy and a sense of rivalry, Sumin became even more determined. She vowed to win Park Man-hwan at all costs. Yet, why was everything still not going as she wished? Sumin remembered lying next to him when Park Man-hwan had mentioned over the phone to Ji-won that the two families would meet at 5 p.m. at the traditional Luen restaurant. She couldn't let things stay like this. She couldn't just let them get married. Sumin sat down to fix her makeup. All her efforts up to this point, would they really end up being overshadowed by Ji-won? Surely, before the grand wedding day, she would find a way to keep Park Man-hwan by her side. Once there's a first time, a second is definitely on the way. At exactly 5 p.m., Ji-won hopped into a cab and headed to the meeting spot. The families were already there, chatting joyfully together. Her cheating fiancé, Park Man-hwan, was sweet-talking his parents, completely at ease. A knock on the door echoed through the room, and Ji-won stepped in, politely greeting Park Man-hwan's parents. Upon seeing Ji-won, his parents were genuinely startled by her appearance. She introduced herself as Park Man-hwan's girlfriend, smiling, while everything in the room felt like a replay of her past life. Park Man-hwan's parents were taken aback, mentioning they had heard a lot about her from him. He had described her as a simple girl. Ji-won pretended not to understand his mother's underlying remark as she proudly flaunted the designer handbag Park Man-hwan had gifted her, subtly reminding them of her elevated status. Reflecting on the past, Ji-won realized that even though she hadn't done anything wrong, she used to feel terrified when meeting his parents. But now, things were different. She wondered if Park Man-hwan cared for her at all. He probably cared for his mother more. His mother, however, was quick to assert her authority. She asked if Ji-won knew how to handle household chores, hinting that if no one cooked breakfast, Park Man-hwan wouldn't eat. The tone was clear. Ji-won's worth as a wife would be measured by her domestic abilities, not her love for their son. Ji-won found it quite amusing. She had never even seen Park Man-hwan eat breakfast. With a confident smile, she assured his mother that she would take charge of preparing nutritious meals for Min-an, and, if he had to work overtime, she would personally bring lunchboxes to his office. Min-an's mother, cheery and wanting to be helpful, suggested that every weekend she could prepare side dishes for Ji-won, and they could just pick them up. Ji-won, however, politely declined the offer, saying that she would come to collect them during the week because she wanted Min-an to rest on weekends. This caused his mother to worry aloud that Ji-won might overwork herself since she also had a job. But Ji-won's next statement shocked her. Ji-won nonchalantly revealed her plan to quit her job after the wedding and become a devoted housewife. His mother, taken aback, questioned how she could so decisively choose to quit her career. She asked if Ji-won planned to enjoy life at the expense of her son's earnings, pointing out that other daughters-in-law managed to balance work and family life just fine. Raising children, she argued, would also be very expensive. Ji-won remained calm and countered, asking if it wasn't sufficient for one person to earn money if they didn't have kids. At this moment, Min-an began to sweat. He couldn't understand why Ji-won was acting so differently today. Hearing her response, Min-an's father, who had been silently observing, could no longer contain himself. He slammed his fist on the table and raised his voice, demanding if they wanted their house to be without a legitimate heir. He insisted that only a son could properly take care of the family's ancestral offerings, and questioned how Ji-won could dare stand before her elders and declare she wouldn't have children. But Ji-won didn't back down. Boldly, she replied that her father, despite having only her as a daughter, still used the offerings she prepared for worship. Her words infuriated Min-an's father even more. He argued that once a daughter is married, she must perform the rituals for her husband's family, questioning how she could stomach such defiance. Min-an's mother, visibly upset, joined in, lamenting that Ji-won's father's crime was giving birth to a daughter, as though Ji-won's very existence was a misfortune to the family. Hearing this, Jiwon wondered why being born a girl was considered a crime. Furious, she shouted back, calling Minan's mother an old hag. Park Hwenpani nearly choked at her words. Everything that had happened was beyond his wildest imagination, and he couldn't understand what was going on with Jiwon today. His father's face darkened, confused as to why his son had brought home such a girlfriend. Minan's mother, shaking with anger, demanded to know why Jiwon dared to speak to her like that. Jiwon stood up, leaving the three of them in shock. With her back straight, she declared that she had decided not to marry their son, so calling her mother would be out of the question. Old hag seemed more fitting, she said bluntly. Park Man-hwan was taken aback, asking what nonsense she was talking about. By now, Minan's parents were livid, claiming they had always suspected she would show her true nature like this. They said those without parents were all spoiled, ungrateful people. Jiwon's expression suddenly changed. She coldly asked why, if Minan's mother also had no parents, she would insult Jiwon's parents when they were in the same situation. Minan's mother was stunned into silence by Jiwon's sharp response. She told Minan that she would never agree to him marrying Jiwon, and that she would never allow her to become part of their family. Jiwon replied calmly, "You'll regret that decision." And with that, she walked away. Park Man-hwan called out to Jiwon, confused and desperate to understand why she had changed so much, but she ignored him. Jiwon stepped outside, realizing she could never become the daughter-in-law they wanted. After everything she had heard, it wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was pure insult. Twice now they had crossed the line, and she couldn't take it anymore. With her head held high, Jiwon hurriedly walked away from the place that had caused her so much pain. Suddenly, Jiwon spotted Sumin stepping out of a taxi, dressed as if she were meeting her boyfriend's family for the first time. Jiwon smiled at her. "Sumin, you've arrived just in time. You should marry that jerk for me," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Meanwhile, in the dining room, Park Man-hwan's mother was still fuming, unable to believe her son had brought such a disrespectful girl into their home. She demanded that he end things with Jiwon immediately, insisting that she would never approve of the marriage. Just then, Sumin stepped through the door, feigning surprise. "Oh, what a coincidence to run into you here," she exclaimed brightly. Sumin greeted Park Man-hwan's mother with enthusiasm, introducing herself as his junior at the company, all while tossing in a few compliments about him. Park Man-hwan's mother, softening, confirmed proudly that he took after her. Park Man-hwan, still shaken by Jiwon's outburst, asked Sumin about her prior appointment. Sumin smoothly explained that her parents had urgent matters and couldn't make it, and then slyly mentioned her love for cooking, loud enough for his mother to hear. At the sound of this, Park Man-hwan's mother smiled, clearly pleased. She invited Sumin to dine with them, and naturally Sumin accepted. This was exactly what she had hoped for. She casually asked if it was appropriate, and Park Man-hwan's mother, now completely won over, had already forgotten about Jiwon's outburst. She even remarked how meeting such a straightforward girl like Sumin was a blessing for their family. As Sumin took her place at the dining table, she secretly rejoiced. Jiwon's debut had been a complete disaster, and now Sumin was happily dining with the Minan family. It seemed her plan had been the right choice all along. Jiwon, on the other hand, was on her way home, reflecting on the disastrous events of the afternoon. Just then, her phone buzzed with a message from Park Man-hwan. He asked where she had gone, why she hadn't answered his calls, and expressed his desire to marry her smoothly, wondering if she intended to let things continue this way. As Jiwon walked and read his messages, she thought about how Park Min-hwan and Sumin were truly a perfect match, two people who had always taken everything for granted. Thinking about how Sumin had coveted everything she had for the past 10 years, Jiwon decided it was finally time to give her what she wanted. She smiled to herself, ready to let them have it all. The next morning, Jiwon arrived at the office as if nothing had happened. She didn't expect things to go smoothly, but with just a small nudge, everything was already falling into place. Park Manhwa and Sumin were sneaking out during work hours to flirt. Ji-won knew her task now was to bring this twisted fate to its conclusion before she could embrace her new, brighter life. She had already finished writing her resignation letter, planning to wrap up her affairs and leave this place behind. As Ji-won was about to submit her letter, assistants Jae and Haine invited her to grab some coffee. Ji-won agreed to go with them, feeling a bit lighter after her decision. On their way out, Haine turned to invite department head Jun-hook to join them. Although he couldn't go, he handed Haine his card and told them to consider it his treat. Before they left, Jin-hook added, "There's still plenty of time, Ji-won. Order something nice to eat." Ji-won thanked him, feeling a strange reluctance to leave, thinking maybe she should wait until the company's new product was completed before moving on. Meanwhile, Park Manhwa and Sumin were sneaking around in a nearby motel. As they prepared to leave, Park Manhwa told her to pretend they were out meeting a client for the next hour. Sumin disagreed, reminding him that he had promised to spend the entire day with her. Park Manhwa explained that he had too much to prepare for the upcoming wedding. Sumin, confused, asked if the wedding wasn't called off. Park Manhwa reassured her, saying it was just a minor disagreement between his mother and Ji-won and that everything would smooth over soon. Frustrated, Sumin asked if he planned to break up with her. Park Moon brushed it off, saying their relationship was just a casual fling and nothing serious enough to require a breakup. He kissed her forehead, said goodbye and left, leaving her in shock. Sumin gritted her teeth, furious that even when things were falling apart, he still wanted to be with Ji-won instead of her. Determined not to let all her efforts go to waste, Sumin picked up her phone, plotting her next move. Meanwhile, Ji-won received a call from a high school friend who informed her that Sumin had been asking around for Kim's number. Ji-won thanked her friend for the heads up, knowing something was brewing. Ji-won suddenly remembered how Sumin had previously bothered her and wondered why she would be asking for Kim Tae's number now. It surely couldn't be for anything good. She needed to prepare for what was to come. So, Ji-won submitted the report her manager had assigned her and considered whether she should ask him for help again. She couldn't understand why she thought she could trust the man in front of her. Jung-hook, noticing her hesitation, asked if she needed his help with anything. She, somewhat impulsively, asked if she could take advantage of him just one more time. Jung-hook folded the report, looked at her intently, and told her she could take advantage of him as many times as she wanted. In fact, he was quite happy about it. On her way home that evening, Ji-won suddenly heard someone call out to her. As soon as Kim finished speaking, she knew he would come looking for her. He said that as soon as he saw her, he rushed over immediately. Ji-won told him she hadn't contacted him at all. Meanwhile, Park Man-won was sitting in his car across the street, watching them closely. He wondered who this guy was. He had prepared flowers and gifts for her, but when he called, she didn't pick up. How could she dare to meet someone else behind his back? Just then, Sumin approached and knocked on his car door. She smiled and asked why he was there before getting in the car. Sumin told him that she was a high school classmate of Ji-won's and intentionally mentioned that since their class reunion, they had been inseparable. She warned Park Man-won not to think Ji-won was only into him, as she was deliberately trying to rile him up. Park Man-won grew heated and insisted that Ji-won only loved him. Sumin, ignoring his attitude, kept rambling on about how Ji-won's mother had cheated and abandoned her father. She suggested Ji-won would end up just like her mother. Park Man-won was shocked to hear this, not knowing about Ji-won's mother leaving for another man. Sumin claimed she hadn't mentioned it before because Ji-won was her best friend. But she couldn't stand how Ji-won was treating him. She comforted him and suggested they move to another place, saying that if they stayed there any longer, he would definitely see some unpleasant things. Ji-won watched Park Man-won's car drive away, knowing this was all Sumin's doing. She told Tong that she hadn't contacted him at all. Tong immediately showed Ji-won the messages. Ji-won opened her phone and saw someone had impersonated her to message him. Kim Tong was stunned and furious. He couldn't let anyone manipulate him like that. He asked Ji-won if she thought she was so valuable that someone would go this far. He grabbed her hand, intending to drag her away to confront the culprit. He demanded she be quiet and follow him, but Ji-won insisted he let go of her hand, saying it had nothing to do with her at all. Suddenly, a hand grabbed Kim Tong's from behind, and he was confused about who was doing this. Jin-hook declared he was Ji-won's boyfriend and asked what Kim Tong thought he was doing with her. Jin-hook then asked Ji-won if she was okay. At that moment, Kim Tong realized what was happening and demanded Ji-hwan let go of him. Furious, Ji-hwan swung his fist straight into Kim Tong's face. The guy fell to the ground in pain. Without a word, Ji-hwan took Ji-won away. Walking beside him, Ji-won felt incredibly safe. She thought that as long as this man was by her side, she could bravely stand up to anyone else. Why hadn't she noticed him before? Ji-won got into the car and Jin-hook drove off. She thanked him for everything that had happened today. Jin-hook smiled and told her she was just exercising her right to take advantage of him, as this was exactly what he had requested. He stopped the car and said they had arrived, leaving Ji-won surprised. Why was he bringing her to a hotel? He explained that she should rest there for the night and he would take her home in the morning. Jin-hook mentioned that the guy from earlier knew her home address, so it would be dangerous for her to go back. Ji-won shook her head in refusal, saying she could go up by herself, but Jin-hook disagreed. He asked, what kind of boyfriend would drop his girlfriend off at a hotel and leave her to fend for herself? Ji-won nervously replied, well, if he brought his girlfriend to a hotel and just left, that would be pretty strange too. She clamped her mouth shut, not understanding what on earth she was talking about. Jin-hook told her that he would also be sleeping there tonight. Jin-hook led Ji-won to the front desk to check in. Jin-hook asked, aren't you supposed to drop me off and leave? He repeated her earlier words with a grin. Panicking, Ji-won blurted out that she was just speaking nonsense. Jin-hook told the receptionist to get him 2 adjacent rooms. Ji-won jumped and asked why 2 rooms. Jin-hook suggested they could book just 1 room, but Ji-won felt embarrassed and admitted that 2 rooms were probably better. She didn't think he would actually stay. Jin-hook watched Ji-won step into her room, and once she was settled, he walked away. He turned to meet up with his crew, pulled out his phone and set up a meeting in the lobby. They informed him everything was taken care of, and from now on no one would dare come near her again. Jin-hook told them not to call him boss but director, as they weren't part of the mafia. Meanwhile, Park Man-han had already driven off. Jin-hook quickly guessed that Sumin was behind all of this. She had impersonated Ji-won and messaged that guy. Perhaps Ji-won had known about it all along, which is why she suggested Jin-hook pretend to be her boyfriend. He looked at his watch. It was already 9 p.m. He wondered what Ji-won was doing at that moment.